Welcome to Politicus, the only podcast that discusses politics and public service from the Portuguese American perspective. Here we discuss everything from federal policy, local issues, and U.S.-Portugal relations with the goal of driving more discussion and awareness of the issues affecting our nation, our community, and what we as Portuguese Americans can do about it. And now, Politicus. Welcome, everybody, to Politicus, the podcast where we discuss politics from the Portuguese American perspective. My name is Angela Simoes. I am current president of PALITICUS. Denise, want to introduce yourself? Welcome.
Thank you, Angela. It is exciting to be here with Politicus. I think this is going to be a very important forum for the Portuguese American communities and those who want to know about the Portuguese American communities in the United States. So we are hoping to have a variety of Portuguese Americans who are involved in many offices, whether they be local, regional, state, and national.
Right. And for those of you who don't know Denise, if you've been under a rock for the last 30, 40 years, Denise is also a director for PALITICUS and also current chair of the board for CPAC, which is a new organization here in California, and which is what we will be talking about today. And our guest today is Steven Nascimento, who is the current executive director of CPAC. So welcome, Steven.
Thank you, Angela and Denise. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. So let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about CPAC, and even maybe a little bit about yourself, because I know that you've been involved in the political arena for a while, even sitting on the city council for Turlock. So you can give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then also how CPAC came to be. Sure.
So my political background really started as working on the staff of former Congressman Dennis Cardoza, as one of our Portuguese American congressmen. Served as a member of his staff for a number of years, ultimately left there as his district director, and also had the chance to serve as the district director for State Senator Anthony Canella, who represents the Central Valley area of California. And it was during that time that we had some conversations in California with other locally elected officials who are of Portuguese American descent about the need really to create a forum where we could interact with one another and try to determine the best way forward to encourage, whether it be young people or those who are interested in public service, and give them the tools and the resources to do that. And at that time, I was serving on the city council in my hometown of Turlock. I was elected in 2012 at the ripe age of 26, and I was really somewhat surprised by the lack of youth in our local government infrastructure. Just looking at other communities nearby, there just wasn't that many young people. And this conversation happening in the Portuguese community about wanting to encourage others to join, the pieces just sort of fell into place. And then meeting individuals like Denise, who had very strong thoughts on these issues as well, put together a board of directors. And on March 4th of 2016, the California Portuguese American Coalition was formed as a way to really bring Portuguese American elected officials and civic leaders in the state together and allow for a stronger collaboration in advancing the interests of our communities. So that was really the genesis of CPAC, or the California Portuguese American Coalition.
Excellent. And so CPAC is a little over a year old, and we just came off of our very first summit, CPAC summit, that we held in Sacramento. And both Denise and I were there with you, and it was really turned out to be a great event. Can you tell us a little bit about why we had that event and what was discussed and what we'll be seeing afterwards?
Yeah, it was a fantastic event. We brought together over 50 elected officials and Portuguese American community leaders in Sacramento for a 2-day summit, discussing a wide range of topics. Most of them focused on how to get Portuguese Americans interested in running, access to the resources they need to be successful in pursuing elected office, and also just ways that they can better become involved in their respective communities, in addition to building coalitions outside of the Portuguese American community to allow us to branch out and to really build the types of coalitions that you need to get elected. It was really a fantastic gathering of individuals. We had representatives from, I think we had over a dozen elected officials all the way from water boards to city councils and mayors and county supervisors. We also had our state assemblywoman, Cecilia Aguiar Curry, who's a Portuguese American who participated in the event, as well as actually our keynote speaker for a breakfast that we held. And bringing all those individuals together with representatives from education and nonprofits, and really getting a good perspective on a path forward that we can all work towards. And that's where CPAC really sees its role, is bringing individuals together and trying to come to a consensus as much as possible about actions that we can take that are really going to have a direct impact on the Portuguese American presence in elected politics in California.
Yeah, I felt it was a great event. And one of the things that was key that I think a lot of people don't realize when you say run for office or be involved, civically or politically, sometimes people think immediately city council or congressman or assembly, things like that. But there are other positions like water board, like planning commission, there's a lot of other positions within a city that you can start with. And I think a lot of the elected officials actually told their story and said how they got their start that way. And so I thought that was an important aspect to highlight too, is that you're not jumping right into the fire in terms of, running for office and having to run a campaign and things like that. There are a lot of other ways to get involved. So Denise, what were your thoughts on the summit?
My thoughts are about the same as most of you just said, but I do agree that one of the important things for Portuguese Americans and anyone thinking about running for office to get their feet wet, as it was said by many of the political entities present, is maybe get yourself appointed to one of these positions. Sometimes people run for something and not have a very successful run at it for various reasons, but you're in the process already. So why not get appointed to a planning commission or a redevelopment committee or something in your local city government to where you can have access to that city government and basically know how things run. And one of the important things that was also mentioned was we have quite a few throughout California. Many of them could not attend, unfortunately, because this is of the nexus of time. However, is the education board. I know one subject that is all dear to all of us in the Portuguese American communities from coast to coast is education for our community. It's a way social mobility within our community and all communities, and also because of the Portuguese language and culture presence that we all aspire to have at our different public education facilities, whether they be elementary or high school. And school boards are an excellent way for folks to get the experience they need to then get into possibly a city office, a supervisor, county supervisor in the case of California and some other states that have this, and also eventually, of course, state or national government. And the school boards make a lot of important decisions, as we all know, and it is so important that we have a larger and larger presence of Portuguese Americans at these various school boards. I also would like to mention that as it was discussed throughout the process, and I think one of the successful events was the two workshops that we had in the afternoon, the one that Angela led, that opened it up for people to basically tell their story, the elected officials, and also to come up with some action items that Steven can talk to us a little bit about and that are being developed by CPAC as we speak, and also the tools that were given by Cliff Costa and Michael Borges, both of them political operatives, for lack of a better word, in the state of California, and who I think gave some important information, tools and resources and thoughts for people to think about before they get into the political arena. So I think it was a mixture of having the reflection, but also, as Steven mentioned, the giving folks the tools and the necessary information to move forward from here.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I think you bringing up the school board was very pertinent because there have been situations in our communities, I think on both coasts, where funding for a Portuguese language program has been threatened. And in those cases, the community has come together to say, no, we need to keep these programs because it's important to our community. And whether you realize it or not, if you participated in that effort to maintain the language program, then you were civically active, right? That's what that's about. That's exercising your voice as a community to either maintain the resources that your community has, in this case, a Portuguese language program, or to either demand or request that you be given resources. Perhaps, another community has a language program and we feel that we deserve one as well. And so that's what that means. It's being civically active, and you can participate in those efforts, and those are very helpful because we need the community to back those efforts. It can't just be the politicians saying we need to have this. We need to have this, and here's all my community constituents that are saying we need to have this, right? There has to be a power behind the elected official, right?
Correct.
And that's how this works.
Correct. And I believe that, as Stephen will also tell you, and kudos to Stephen and everyone else who worked hard for this, one of the important aspects of the summit was the reception. And receptions are what they are, but they're important social functions. And because we tried to bring together a group of legislators who did not attend the event in the afternoon, but were there to network. And it is important for Portuguese Americans to have an active voice, not just within their own. In other words, we have the ideal situation, obviously, would be for every Portuguese American community throughout the United States to have its own elected officials of its own cultural background and ethnic background. But that's not always possible. However, we have many folks of very different backgrounds who work very closely with the Portuguese American community. The state resolution for Dia de Portugal was introduced by a Mexican American who lives in Artesia, who acknowledged Artesia's is small communities in the LA metro area, and who acknowledged that he would have not got into politics had he not had the help and the assistance and the votes of the Portuguese American community in Artesia that allowed him to get on the city council and then to move on into the California State Assembly. In the state of from San Diego, we had the presence of a legislator through our honorary consul, Almiro de Rosa, who invited him personally and who represented Point Loma, and who said to us on a personal basis that he wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the resources, some of the financial backing, and some of the votes of the Portuguese American community. And he is also of Hispanic heritage. So I think that we can build coalitions, and that we talked a lot about that. And that's, I believe, one of the CPAC action items for the future, about coalitions with these other ethnic groups. And where we do not have a Portuguese American elected official, they are still our elected officials, and it is very imperative that our voice is present. I think that Stephen would agree with this.
Yeah, and so I think one of the important items you brought up was the school board example, and sometimes the threat of funding being removed from Portuguese language programs. There is an old saying in politics that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's really to highlight the importance of being engaged and being involved in the decision-making, and the threat that exists if you're not at that table and not making those decisions, that the things that are important to you may end up on that menu of items that get cut when budgets get lean. And so I think one of the really important aspects of the CPAC Summit was that it was held in Sacramento, and really trying to get the Portuguese American community accustomed to going to Sacramento where these decisions are being made and making their presence known. And I think the summit was very successful in doing that. We had time to network with several members of the State Assembly and the State Senate, and even discovered a senator who was not on our radar, who turns out who has some Portuguese heritage. And so we're able to increase our list of identified Portuguese American elected officials through this outreach, and really start to build that relationship and start having some important conversations about the future of the Portuguese American community in California's political system. And one of those things that came out of the summit in discussions with some of those state assembly members and state senators was the need to, the desire to create a Portuguese American caucus in Sacramento that would have a chair in the Senate and a chair in the Assembly, and bring even non-Portuguese American elected officials at the state level onto that caucus, those who represent heavily Portuguese American communities, and give us a forum to discuss with a group of legislators who represent those communities and identify with those communities, and we'll have a greater appreciation for the issues that impact the Portuguese American community throughout the state.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I think one has been in existence in Rhode Island State Assembly for quite some time now. And the New York community is actually looking to establish one in New York as well. So, whether it's the current political climate that's driving a lot of interest and engagement, I'm not sure, or maybe it's just people becoming more aware, but I feel like people are definitely more interested and their ears are perking up to say, maybe I should be paying attention, and what can I do? How can I get involved? So what were some of the action items that came out of the summit? One that comes to mind is, and the reason I ask this question is because, if someone listens to this podcast, they may not go out and, fill out the application to run for office tomorrow, but there could be things that they can do tomorrow or even right after this podcast that can help put them on the path to becoming civically active. And one of those things was even just encouraging others to consider running for office or getting involved. Hey, come to this meeting with me. Hey, have you ever thought of running for political office? Have you ever, so it's more just about the conversation and actually talking about it, right? So what are some of the other action items that came out of the summit?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to touch on that first point you mentioned, because I think it's a very important one, and that really elected office is a higher form of community service, right? You are volunteering to represent your community and their concerns, and I think there are other ways to be involved in your community that don't require you to run for elected office, but certainly serve as a great foundation for doing so. And so we really do want to encourage those who even if they have just a slight interest or think maybe that's something I want to explore in 5 or 10 years from now, is to get involved in your community in a way that allows you to learn more about the issues that are impacting your community, allow you to build a support base. And you can do that a lot of ways through appointments. If you're in a city, you can get an appointment to a planning commission. Myself, I served on my Parks and Recreation Commission in Turlock for 4 years before running for city council. And the other aspect of that is encouraging others who may have an interest or that have promise that you see would make a good elected representative, is encouraging them to get engaged, to seek appointments, or to just run for office. It's a powerful thing when someone tells you that they think that you would be a good representative. You hear that enough times. I know that for me, when I first ran, I was 25 years old when I started my campaign, and to have a number of people telling me, hey, you would make a good council person, you should consider running for elected office, and you hear that from 3 or 4 people, and it's hard to ignore, and it can really light a fire. And so if you see someone that you think would be a good representative for your community, encourage them. They're powerful words, and they have an impact. And we all know we need as many good people in politics these days as we can get. So get busy recruiting.
Absolutely. Denise, any additional thoughts you want to add to that?
I think I'd like to just piggyback on what Steven said as far as the action items are concerned, force getting folks involved. Some of the action items that were discussed during the CPAC summit was making CPAC a little bit more known throughout the community. So I know that the board and with Steven, who's our executive director, will be hosting different events throughout the Portuguese American communities in California. California is a huge state, as we all know. And we have key communities in the Bay Area, in the Central Valley. There's like 2 locations where there are 2 key communities, although we're spread out through the entire San Joaquin Valley, of course, Sacramento, and then the LA area and the San Diego, also metropolitan area. So we'll be doing lots of outreach to these communities within the next few months, building up already the 2018 summit. And I believe that some of the other action items were also to identify key elements within the Portuguese American community that kind of unify us. We're a very integrated community in California, as everyone knows. And so our issues a lot of times are just the issues that are the same for other ethnic communities, whether they be European, South American, Asian, etc. But we do have some issues that are a little bit more pertinent to us, to our community, than are to others. And so we want to identify these issues and rally around them and build a successful coalition, as the name says, California Portuguese American Coalition, build a successful coalition of elected officials, but also of community leaders. It was very important to have about 4 dozen community leaders at this event. And I should state that these community leaders were not just leaders of Portuguese organizations, which are very important, but they were also leaders of different cultural organizations. They were leaders in the education field. We had a superintendent of public schools present, school educators. We had folks from different paths and different parts of California, all the way from San Diego to the Bay Area. So now it's just a matter of getting these things together, building up these action items that will be important to move our community forward.
And so you mentioned a great point, is that, a lot of the issues that are important to us are important to other members of society, right? And if we ask the question, well, why is it important for Portuguese Americans to be civically active? Well, because it's important for everybody to be civically active, right? But I'm wondering, is our community unique in any way? Like, is there any, and this question is for both of you, do you think that there's, whether it's how we were brought up, kind of our cultural background, the fact that we do integrate and assimilate quite well, but still maintain our heritage, what's kind of unique about our community that's a little different from other ethnic groups?
Hey, Angela, I think the Portuguese community in California is certainly unique. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of the Portuguese communities on the East Coast, and was born and raised here in California, and have seen many of our Portuguese communities here in California. And even between the two coasts, there's certainly a distinct difference between the communities. And I think a lot of that has to do with economic issues. When the Portuguese immigrated to California, many of them went into agriculture, started their own businesses, and tended to settle down in more rural areas that didn't allow them the luxury of really being able to create their own little Portuguese communities within their community. They were forced to integrate in order to be successful. And so I think that has certainly been an advantage to the Portuguese American community in California. They've prospered, they've done well, they've integrated well. The downside of that is that culturally, I think we suffer a little bit in California. The celebrations on the East Coast, because their communities are more densely populated, more tight-knit, I think they probably have some more longevity on the cultural side in maintaining those cultural practices. Whereas in California, because we're so rural, at least in the Central Valley, where many of our Portuguese immigrants settled, I think that there is you don't have that as strong of a tie or a sense of community out here. But it has allowed us to be very powerful advocates for the Portuguese American community. We have 3 members of Congress who represent the Central Valley, who are all of Portuguese American descent. Many of them received very strong and substantive financial support from the Portuguese American community when they ran for office. I know when I worked for Congressman Cardoza, he told me a story of a group of volunteers in the Portuguese community who, when he was running for state assembly, went around to all the local dairies and asked them to donate cows for the campaign. They call it Cows for Cardoza. And he was able to raise $30,000 for his assembly campaign, which at that time was a significant amount of money for a state assembly campaign. So I think there are certainly advantages when it comes to certain economic advantages that the immigration process in California and the way we've settled here has played. But there are, some downsides to that integration as well.
If I may add, Angela, I think also the part of the uniqueness of the Portuguese American community, I think obviously all cultures are unique and we have our unique differences. We have assimilated very well in California, and there's costs to assimilation, as Steven mentioned. However, part of our issues now have to do with our culture assimilating into the American mainstream. We haven't done a good job of that. But that's something for our cultural organizations and our organizations in general, religious, cultural, recreational, etc., to have that debate. However, I would say that we have the uniqueness of our language and our culture, and I think that one of the ways that the Portuguese American communities can move forward is to have the presence of the Portuguese language and culture at California public institutions, and we have a very good presence in the higher education. Many of the CSUs, California State University systems, have educational programs for Portuguese language classes, a couple of community colleges, and some of the UCs as well especially the key UCs in the key areas. However, we have to do a better job in the high school level. We have to do a better job in the elementary level. We have to do a better job in the community college level. From data that I've seen, the majority of our Portuguese American students who go to college, and the majority of them do go to college, and that's a great thing, but they still go to a JC first, a junior college, as we call it here in California, community college. And so we have a very low presence of the Portuguese language there. So I think if there's one unique aspect is, of course, our language. It's different than other languages, and around that, the cultural uniqueness of it. And so I think we need to build upon that, because where there is a strong Portuguese or even any kind of Portuguese language program at the elementary, secondary, or JC community college level, normally that community is vibrant, because you're not just building up the coalition of the language within the young people at the school, but the language is being taught to other ethnic groups who learn a little bit more about our group. And it's easier for those folks, for those young people, as they go into the realm of public service, to have already coalitions built in, and for others to understand the Portuguese presence in California.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think some people will say, well, why would somebody who's not Portuguese take Portuguese? Well, you know, how many of us took Spanish, French, or German, and we're not Spanish, French, or German, right? It's because it was offered. It was an option. And I think
it's the sixth most spoken language on earth. And right now, that's a tidbit, in the high school I teach, or the high school district I teach, we have 423 students. And of those 423 students, 235 are not of Portuguese background.
Wow. That's amazing. I think it's a testament to the interest level that people have in the Portuguese language. So
correct. And I think so that's what makes us unique. And I think we can build upon that.
No, I think it's a great point. So we have reached our time. We do have one last question that we will be asking all of our guests. But before we do that, I just want to recognize FLAD, because they have been a big supporter of CPAC, and they supported the summit. And so I just wanted to make sure that we recognize their support for that. And so let's get to our last question for Steven, which is, and we've sort of already talked about some of these suggestions or pieces of advice, right? But what suggestion or piece of advice would you give to anyone, young or old, about increasing their civic participation?
Yeah, I think the most important advice I give to young people is that you have to show up. You have to show up to class. You have to show up to work. You have to show up to the mixers. You have to show up at events. It may not always be convenient, but what I have found in my experience, and I believe I had an advantage when I was working for elected officials, a big part of my job was to attend networking type events to represent the elected officials I was working for. And it really taught me the importance and the value of networking. And there were events a lot of times where I didn't feel like going to, but it was my job. I had to be there, and I would make connections that really led to some great things down the road. And so my advice to young people is to show up and to get engaged. You have to, if you have an opportunity, we had scholarships available for young people to attend the CPAC summit. We had a young lady by the name of Ariana Santos who applied for that scholarship, received the scholarship, attended the summit, and through a conversation with the chairman of FLAD, was able to line up an internship with FLAD for next summer, and she'll be back in Portugal and Lisbon interning for them next summer. And she would have not had that opportunity and that conversation had she not shown up. So those are that is the key piece of advice I like to give young people, is to really be willing to put yourself out there. And so, yes, I also wanted to recognize the FLAD, the Luso-American Development Foundation, for their support of CPAC, and really a number of great initiatives in California that they have been supporting over the last couple of years under their new leadership. It's really been a great partnership, and we appreciate everything that they're doing for our communities out here.
Excellent. Denise, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just a big thanks also to FLAD. As Steven said, they have been very instrumental in California in both the political world, but also in building coalitions with education and culture, as they have done in the East Coast for many years. And I think that their role under the leadership of Vasco Hatu, whom we hope to have soon as a guest here on Politicus, will certainly has revitalized this relationship and this kind of people-to-people program, although it's not a sister city program, but it's a people-to-people program that brings the communities together and mainstreams the communities in a way that they do not lose their own cultural heritage and their own specific ethnic background, but at the same time encourages all of us to participate in the political system in the United States.
Absolutely. And with that, we will wrap up this episode. So thank you both for participating. We appreciate your time today. Thank you all for tuning in to this new podcast. We are really excited to be exploring the different themes of political activity and being civically involved within our community. If you found this conversation useful and interesting, please like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. Leave us a comment. Please also leave us a review. If you have suggestions for guests or a suggestion for a topic, please email us at PALITICUS, PALCUS, @palcus.org. We would love to hear from you. Help to create this podcast into a forum for our community to discuss the topics that are most important to you. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Steven. And until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Politicus, the official podcast of PALITICUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States. PALITICUS is the premier national organization representing the interests of the Portuguese American community at large. To learn more about PALITICUS and how to become a member or to make a donation, visit www.palcus.org. To submit feedback or suggestions about the podcast, email us at palcus@palcus.org. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the show are not endorsed by PALITICUS.